preparing today, I'd like to make some comments or ask some questions about the distressing floods. But first of all, I want to commend you for admitting that you don't know everything. That's so refreshing to hear. I mean, I don't know everything, and someone who's talking about weather certainly doesn't know everything. Nature's highly variable, and natural variation is enormous. Coming to the floods, very distressing for people. I think it's important to give them the right information. According to Bureau of Meteorology's graphs, in the last 100 years there have been 2 major floods, and in the previous 90 years there were 11 major floods.
Sorry, just to be clear, Senator, where are you talking about? In Brisbane?
Sorry, Brisbane, yes,
Brisbane.
thank you,
right.
yeah. In 1974, the flood was much less, which is the highest recent flood in the last 100 years. 1974, the flood levels reached were much less than 1893 and
Correct.
much less than 1841.
Correct.
So has the government, state or federal, discussed anything about doing some research with regard to flood mitigation?
Maybe I could respond to 2 parts of your question. You're right, Senator, there have been bigger floods in Brisbane since records have been kept, and records have only been kept since the 1840s, so who knows how big the floods really get in Brisbane. When you look at the historical narratives, if you read George Somerset's writings and where the traditional people of the Brisbane Valley used to have their summer camps, one could possibly reasonably draw a conclusion that the flood levels have even been higher.
Well, you're familiar with where the university's experimental mine is at Indooroopilly?
Yeah.
Apparently, geologists say that the floods were 5 metres higher than the 1841 floods. I mean, that's just
that's
unfathomable.
All of these things are possible. But just to correct the record, there have been 12 major floods in Brisbane since 1840 and 3 since 1970, including the most recent one. So we had the 74, the 10-11 and the one the other day. So 3 major floods in Brisbane since 1970, and certainly the most recent one's the 74 flood was
I was just going off the Bureau's graph and had lines.
Well, we
drawn
probably
major.
haven't put the line on for this one the other day yet, but
No, it was on there.
Oh, was it? Okay,
Yeah, but it
there
didn't
are
go-
3:
yeah.
74, 10, 11, and 22. So that, just for the record, Chair, that is the flood history in Brisbane. The second part of your question, flood mitigation, that's not a responsibility of the Bureau, that's the responsibility of state governments. As you know, and local government indeed, and as you know, obviously Wivenhoe Dam being put in, although its primary purpose is not for flood mitigation, it's for water security, it does perform a flood mitigation function. And the Brisbane City Council also undertakes significant flood mitigation works. You'll probably be aware since the 10-11 flood they've installed extensively throughout Brisbane engineering works to try and reduce the backflow of water from the river up into the suburbs, which was one of the experiences from the 10-11 flood, that people were getting flooded through water coming back up through the stormwater system. So that the flood mitigation work is their responsibility. Certainly the flood mitigation works draw heavily on Bureau data.
That's what I was
Bureau
getting at.
historical
It's
data.
not your responsibility to
It's not our responsibility to do the work,
but
to do the
they
mitigation.
do consult with you.
Correct, and the state and local governments also heavily utilise not only their own in-house capability but significant capability in the private sector. So we make all that data available, and people are welcome to use it, and we hope they use it to keep our community safer in the future.
Right. My question wasn't going to any attempt to pin you down, blame you for the floods.
No, I
That's
wasn't
ridiculous.
reading it that way, Senator.
So
No.
good.
Yeah.
But I can't imagine the Bureau has any responsibility to correct politicians or media that produce stories saying the floods in 2022 were due to climate change caused by humans or anything like that. That's their responsibility, isn't it? It's not yours.
Well, we just report what we see happening in the environment. We don't, and we try to do so to the best of our ability as factually as we can. So we don't choose to speculate on this. What we've said very clearly is that with climate change, we can expect the frequency of high intensity rainfall events to increase.
Based on models?
Based on models and also based on our recent experience. What we also can see, just as a basic law of physics, is that for every 1 degree the temperature rises, the atmosphere holds about 7% more water. So Australian temperature record is about 1.47 plus or minus 0.2-ish since records have been kept. So that roughly, I'm not an engineer like you are, Senator, but so roughly about atmosphere holding roughly about 10% more water than it might have had in pre-industrial times. That water's got to go somewhere, circulates around the planet, it's part of a mass balance with the oceans and the rivers. So I think it's absolutely reasonable to expect, as the climate continues to change, that the likelihood of these high intensity events like we've seen will increase, and all other things being equal, increasing risk of flooding for those communities that live on active floodplains. So a lot of people live really close to rivers that are still very active.
And some people say that Brisbane is the city built in a river.
Indeed. I think the title of the book is A River with a City Problem. That's right. So I don't know the book you're referring to. Yeah.
So some would argue, and there's a lot of conjecture around this, but just in response, some argue that an increase in water vapour in the atmosphere leads to a cooling effect for all kinds of reasons. So there's a lot of uncertainties in forecasting the weather, forecasting the climate. Coming back to your questions, my questions and your answers in the previous Senate estimates in February, I said, I'll just quote from the transcript, I'm asking whether the state of the climate reports actually show that scientifically prove that carbon dioxide from human activity affects climate and needs to be cut. And you responded, well, I've got the report in front of me. I don't believe there's a section in there that, well, that's right, it's not the purpose of the report. I happen to agree with you. Mm-hmm. I've been through many of the reports. Then you went on later on and said, I think we've made it really clear what the purpose of the document is. It's to provide a synthesis of our observations of Australia's climate and oceans. Previously, you said, I think it's important for the record to note that none of the state of the climate reports in any way whatsoever make statements with respect to global emissions. So I compliment you for your clarity, and I appreciate your clarity. It's not the Bureau of Meteorology's responsibility to correct politicians when they say that state of the climate contains evidence of cause and effect.
Certainly the Bureau is not in the habit of making public comment around statements that our elected officials make. Senator, as you know, our job is to advise, and elected representatives are free to say whatever they wish to say. I
Thank
think
you.
Of everybody, you would probably know that best. So no, we provide our best scientific advice to you, and you'll form your own conclusions on that advice.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. That's all I have.
Thanks.